Hold this first.
Oh,
All right.
I want them to hold this.
2. So we're
I
going
have
to
to
be.
pass them back and forth.
I may just keep an eye because they want to do 40 minutes and like
40
50.
minutes is max.
And then some Q&A. Are you okay for Q&A?
Maybe.
You can also. Say. Okay.
Scout persons.
I have a recording mic, so you have to speak louder.
Should
You have to-
Should we
do you wanna
switch?
switch?
We should. No. I mean, should I sit here
No,
so
I
that
think
she
this
can
is
get over
like
there?
a-
They're
Just
recording us.
Speak into Martha's into that also.
Like,
Just like that.
we're sitting.
Up more.
How about mine?
Very good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and is this mic on?
You have to press it till it turns blue.
And then I'll make some noise.
Check.
Is it working?
Yeah, I think it's working. What's that? Okay,
There's a volume.
of the mic. How about now? Good? Okay.
What about this one? Too much? Too much?
Okay, thank you everyone for coming today for the artist talk between Pam Lins and Roger White, moderated by Martha Schwendener, who is an art critic with the New York Times, and also is a professor at Uffner Liu. Excitingly, Martha has a book that's coming out next March. It's called The Society of the Screen, featuring the producers Radical Presence. That is coming out with the MIT Press.
Thank you.
We are really excited about today's talk. This is a show that's been sort of a long time coming. Both Roger and Pam have been with the gallery since 2008. So it's very exciting when you get to see them come together. In this back room, it's 2 separate bodies of work, Pam on the floor, Roger on the walls here. But in the room that we came in, that is a collaborative work that Roger and Pam built together. So we're very excited to listen to them talk about all things related to the show, and I'm sure so much more art history and theory. After the talk, please walk around. There's also another show upstairs that's called Made in Curly. We'll have about 15 minutes following the talk for a Q&A. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Thanks everybody for coming. This sounds weird. Is this okay?
That sound good? That sound okay?
Does that sound okay, or is it loud? How about now? Yes? Up? How about now?
I think you have a projectile. You gotta hold it.
Oh, I gotta hold it. Oh my god. Sorry, guys.
That looks weird.
We should have done a mic check first, but okay, here we are. Okay, this is very exciting because we're all here. We're with the work. We're not looking at it on Instagram. We're not online. Any of those kind of things. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk about really is in terms of materials, because we have the work here, we have the artists here, and what's really exciting about this show is a lot of the material processes, a lot of the materials. So the first thing I just wanted to do is point out the cut paper works, which I was told are not necessarily collages, and let Roger talk about that a little bit. And then also, be able to be here with the sculptures and think about some of the things that Pam's thinking about, and then ultimately kind of move on to some of the things that tie the whole show together in terms of thinking about both materials and particularly something like time, since the title of the show is called Laterness, and we'll get to that a little bit later. So with Roger, I thought I would start with you first in terms of thinking about cut paper, color, and also just some of the subjects of the work that I wasn't really particularly familiar with. If you are familiar with Roger's work, you'll know that the one right above Rachel is a plastic container, like a food, something that, for instance, fruit might come in, but it's one of these kind of throwaway things. The one right above Meredith, sorry to exactly, is a self-portrait, and you can see that it's one of those noise cancellation sort of quieting things that you see in the therapist's office, and those recur a couple of times. And then I learned later that this work here he made with his daughter. So some of these things that we maybe don't quite know right away. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about the paper process and about some of the subjects?
Sure, I will. Hi, everybody. Does this sound all right? It feels very strange to do this. I was just telling Lucky that I was making I'm an oil painter mainly, and I was noticing that my paintings were getting slower and slower and slower to make, and I wanted to do something that had a sort of a different speed to it. I was asked to teach a color class at Middlebury College, and I was thinking a lot about Joseph Alberts, who was an educator who did this very famous color class where students only worked with collaging sort of silk-screened sheets of paper called Color Aid, which are incidentally all over Pam's sculptures. I had the idea that what if the students in the class were to make their own paper, make their own colors, and then do something with it. So I started dipping watercolor paper into liquid acrylic sort of dye baths and seeing what effects that produced, and then sort of assembling things out of that. And for me, it just opened sort of a different way to make an image that had a different sense of physicality than paintings did. Because I was, really focusing on color, first thing I did was sort of go through the kinds of things that I tended to make already, like pictures of little plastic doodads and calendars and anything that sort of caught my eye. And the show sort of developed sort of associatively through kind of having my focus almost on a different aspect of the making. But it occurred to me that I wanted to make, for example, a cuttlefish and a CD that seemed sort of like more justifiable because I was really exploring collage. And that was sort of what it meant. And the cut paper versus collage distinction was
educate us.
No, there was no real. Pam and I were wondering if collage implied found materials rather than made materials. And I don't know if those of you that work in collage might have a sense of whether or not that's true. But for me, I thought of collage would be like you take something that already exists and put it together. And this, I was kind of building them out of paper that happened to be sort of like cut into pieces before it was painted.
So not collage.
So not collage.
Not papier-collé.
No, yeah.
Picasso and Braque.
The Frenchness of it.
Yeah, got it.
troubling.
You're like, let's make it an American.
That's right. Yeah.
We won't go there. Any other things you want to say before I ask Pam a couple questions? Or
No, I feel like that was enough.
okay, thank you. With Pam's new works, I say new works. Hopefully you're familiar with, if Roger's a painter or known primarily as a painter. Pam, I know you were painting and then moved into sculpture. And, I won't go into the history of your work. I was reading the catalog today from the Tang and sort of reacquainting myself with some older work. And we'll get into that in a minute. But this work, you've got the flat rate USPS boxes, and then the Color Aid paper, and these birds, which I didn't know at the time, and then I sort of learned later, are Audubon birds, but they're his mystery birds. So Audubon, of course, wrote about all these different birds and discovered about 25 species. But then there were also these birds that seem to be, even today, because I looked it up this morning, still don't seem to really have I don't know what you'd say, provenance? I don't know. They don't know what they are. And then you've got the plaster form. So it's a slightly new, I mean, for me, I was a little bit surprised because I'm used to ceramics and some of those things, but you do have the elements that remind us of these kind of older modernist forms that have been, in your work before. Do you want to, I don't know, you want to bring us up to speed on?
Which aspect of those many things?
Yeah.
Is the mic okay?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess like I tend to work in projects, so I'll just sort of say how I started making this work. A couple years ago, I started working with the boxes again. I've used these boxes in my work for a pretty long time, maybe 15 years. And I just sort of got to the point where it's like, what's in the studio? I'm just going to use what's in the studio. I don't want to go out and buy like 17 pieces of new plywood. I just wanted to like work in a kind of urgent manner, and by hand. I wanted to make everything by hand. I didn't want to job things out. I didn't want to like try to find like a place to weld things, you know. So I started making the box forms, and I've been doing this a long time, so I have a lot to draw from also, and somebody came to my studio and they're like, "Oh, you're in the best place because you can just throw anything in that you've done the last like 25 years." So in a way, that's what I did with these. I allowed myself to like, okay, here comes the color aid paper, here comes the like weird plant paintings I've been making. Here's the UPS boxes, UPSP boxes. And then there's the birds, which I sort of have do a thing often with the work where something like historically sort of stays with me. And I found out about the Audubon history birds, and I was like, I'm just going to make those birds. So all these forms are loosely based off those Audubon history birds. And so then I sort of just started, making forms with all these things. I sort of think of them as like kind of making fictions from the ground up. And most of the things are from like my own way of thinking, but they became like a new project in themselves. Good.
Yep. Also, the thing that both of you have, you're thinking about the colored paper, teaching color theory or some version of it. You're working with the color aids, and I sort of was thinking about this because of, you have, I mean, for me at least, art historically, art critically, whatever, these kind of associations. Say, was Ellsworth Kelly and his Colors for a Large Wall. In 1951 that was based on, he didn't choose, the colors were pre-made, or similarly Gerhard Richter's color charts, which the color was determined by industrial paints. And I was thinking, because you're both, such smart, thoughtful people, I was thinking I kind of wanted to hear what your thoughts were on color today, or just, I don't know.
Color today.
That will be the name of the show.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think I think of color today in relation to how it photographs, particularly how it photographs and then is sort of shrunk down to low resolution to communicate itself online, which is how I see, unfortunately, most of the works of art that I come across. I live in Vermont. I've definitely noticed that color in visual art over the past 20 years seems to have been optimized for that format. And the question is what to do with that, or is there a sort of a way to use color that notes that, or sort of is aware of that, or shows that? I thought about with my work that the way the paper was made might have attributes that are not visible in reproduction, and that was sort of interesting and maybe justified the idea of asking people to come out in real space to a room and look at them. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to know what to do with color these days, but the question of sort of standardization is also very interesting, and whether or not we're in some senses we're kind of living in the world of standardized colors, where Richter's thousand pre-made colors are just sort of like the color array of your sort of like Photoshop color space now, and we have to do things within that. I just wanted to have really vivid, really sort of deep colors as much as possible with these.
You definitely feel like saturated rather than pop.
Yeah, like in the
Well, I like it as a kind of found color thing. I'm trying to not make this about myself. The guy that I write about, Bill and Flusser, the whole last chapter of my book is it got a whole color theory thing. And so it's always kind of changing. One of the newest things that's happened in color, may have even changed since, is that so some scientists realized the formulas we're using for light and color are actually kind of off. And so the reason that it makes any difference is because the amount of color you need, for instance, for a show on Netflix, you could shrink the bandwidth if you changed the color, and so it would be about 15% less in terms of the energy of upload. So it's like always developing, and that's why I think it's interesting that we're seeing a particularly colorful direction, but it's just one of those things, and particularly something if we have time to talk about, but also with pedagogy. I mean, we're all teachers, and so if you teach, I'm always curious what people are teaching when it comes to some sort of color theory thing. But anyway, color.
When we got for color.
Sure.
I guess like I've always kind of used color in the sculptures as like a kind of spatial device, like on this side there's color, on the other side there's not. And of course, the funny thing about sculpture is you walk around, you sort of forget what you just saw, and you remember it, and you forget it, and you remember it. So I've sort of used color as a kind of logic tied into that. I mean, I got sort of interested in the coloring paper when they, I don't know, like so many years ago, when they started like putting the numbers of the Photoshop equivalents on the back. And I was like, oh, coloring might not be Photoshop. But I also got interested because like the factory where it's made is in upstate New York, and they've been making it's silkscreen color, so it's not printed. And I just was, I like to sort of like, research a little bit of like where materials come from. So I got really interested in that factory where they make it, and I tried to visit it a few times. I thought everyone has visited it because they were like, we'll get back to you, and like never did. So that's kind of a bucket list thing I had, is to get to the coloring factory. I don't know, did I answer your question?
Yeah, it's fine. We can move on. We're on a tight schedule here. Next topic. We haven't talked about the work in the front room, which is actually a collaboration, which is really wonderful. And the things that I kind of thought about with that, because the works in that show, hopefully you looked at them, if you looked at the checklist and you saw the titles, they're Galaxy and then individually RSTUVWXYZ, which sort of makes me feel like I'm doing the alphabet at the end, which I love. No, cannot. Sorry. But the thing is, and this feels maybe a little bit more Pam, is that it has a historical referent, or I don't know, whatever word you want to use, inspiration or touchstone, which is Friedrich Kiesler's Galaxies. Here I printed one out. I printed out a drawing. This is from MoMA, their website, where these were these works that were kind of in between architecture, in between painting, sculpture. It's interesting because you can sort of feel the Roger parts, you can feel the Pam parts. I think the other two parts that are aspects of it that are interesting for me is a 3D printed component holding it together, right? And then I was told last week that it's not glued or anything, but it somehow holds together. And for me, all of a sudden, I had this association. If anyone saw that temple architecture show at Japan Society where they snapped together. I mean, I say they snapped together like it's Legos. You apprentice for years and then you become, part of this community of people who make this architecture, but it doesn't include nails or any of those kind of carpentry things. So I thought if you wanted to talk about that, just the way that those came together, but also, and this is where we go into this sort of time, the last portion of the talk, the time element, because very often your work does have a historical, again, touchstone, I guess is the word I would use. A work that I really loved, an installation, a show that Pam had, was based on this photograph. Is this the right photograph?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, of this Soviet art school, and then she remade the forms. And so for me, this feels like a very consistent, I guess you could say, part of your practice is kind of looking back, but also importantly, and when we think about time and some of those things, sort of utopian approaches to art making. But anyway, not to get ahead of myself, if you guys want to talk about the collaboration.
I think it's more of a Pam thing.
Okay.
I mean, I had seen like a black and white photo of those peaceless satellites a while ago, and I was just, love that hardware. I'm just gonna make that hardware. I don't want to make paintings. And then like actually a new book of the galaxies came out like a couple years ago, so I got to see some color photos of them. And again, I just thought I'm just gonna make those galaxies sort of hardware things, and do something with them, display those. And so I started with like drawings, and then a student of mine like helped me with 3D printing, and the idea was that they would go into wood, sort of. I would be making it into wood eventually, and we were just using these as sort of the models. And then I of course got interested in their models, and so we ended up printing them with a PLA that has like 30 to 40% wood. So when you sand it, it starts to look like MDF or something. And I was like, oh, I like that. I'll just stop there. And spent a lot of time like trying to figure out like, how deep should the channels be? How wide should they be? And made some panels that fit into those channels. And then Roger, visited my studio, and I was like, do you want to make paintings on these panels? And he was like, I will glue paper to them. I don't know. So like the day before the opening, Roger glued paper to the panels, and they fit in. And I'm really into like pressure fitting. I don't like hardware that much, even though it's like amazing stuff and there's amazing hardware. I love pressure fitting things, and they're all pressure fit into the Galaxy hardware situations. I don't know.
Yeah, it was the first only collaboration I've done as a work of art, and it was great. Highly recommend it. What I thought was interesting about Kiesler's works is that he was as I learned recently on Wikipedia, an architect and a stage designer, as well as a painter, sculptor, and had an idea that the way that you physically encountered images, and related to your body, could open up kind of new spaces of consciousness, a very sort of modern, sort of constructivist idea of using abstraction in that way. And it was interesting to, I think, revisit that in light of the kind of expanded range of looking at art that we're talking about, and more particularly the flattening of the range of looking at art. So the idea that the angles of the panels would mean something in some sort of language and gesture towards transformation is really interesting to explore now, since it's so late.
Yeah, also when I first walked in, I thought of the El Lissitzky Crowns and the Crown Room, and I thought, oh yeah. Yeah, and I love that kind of conversation. I talk about it, well, some of my students are here. I talk about that all the time, like it's a larger conversation. For me, I don't feel like any of this stuff is ancient history. I feel like it's right now and it's in the room with us, and that's part of what I love about that. But moving on, the next section of the talk is about time. So I'm surprising them. We decided we didn't do a whole thing. I laid it out. Okay. So what I was thinking though with time is that Roger, of course, you see a calendar work on the back there, and you saw one when you were coming in. He's done a lot, and a wonderful invitation or poster that you can take, artwork you can have. And you see this kind of range, the calendars with nothing on them, but looking back at some of the writing on your work, where it's the Gregorian calendar, it's the grid, and now it has, for instance, the one in the front room has very specific references to climate change in terms of the hottest day of the year in certain parts of the world. And so time kind of moving forward in a very different way now than we might have looked at a calendar as something more neutral. Do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I think this gets maybe to the title of the show. Like, I think for me, a lot of the work about calendars and futurity has to do with the way a future date might signify something different than in the heyday of conceptual art. Like the last time a lot of artists were using the calendar form as this sort of like neutral format. So thought a lot about on Kawara and the fact that if you're making a date painting on a certain day, there's a kind of a tight logic to that. But if you're making a calendar for a date in the future, you're no longer sort of pegged to any particular thing. You're just speculating, you're just sort of casting forward into this maybe anxiety producing space. And yeah, with the work in the front room, I'd also been doing sort of a lot of calendars that recorded sort of temperature changes and highs and lows. And I have a sort of a series where there's the date and the hottest recorded temperature on the globe and the lowest recorded temperature on the globe. So that one is Julia Creek in Australia and a research station in Antarctica for the highest and the lowest. And I just wanted to sort of create almost like a map or a scale as a picture, propose that the sort of pictorial space could function in that way. Both it's like kind of a geographic space, but also a range. Obviously, color relates to that, and how we sort of express, abstract information through color. That's pretty much all I got with that. Before we go into sort of why we called the show what we did.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting when you talk to kind of climate scientists, and I've had this occasion through artists who work in that field, and they look at color and maps, and that's like color is one of their big things where they sort of overlap with artists in terms of reading changes in climate. All right, so the title of the show, this got very interesting for me personally, relates to, it's called Laterness, but it relates to this essay, it's an essay, but it's 6 propositions, that was in October magazine. It's called 6 Propositions After Trump's Second Victory. I saw this on the press list and I was like, the reason it's funny for me is it's David Joslett and Pam Lee, and David Joslett's one of the readers of my dissertation. So he and I overlapped at the Graduate Center. And Pam Lee, I have a bifurcated education in art history. She and I were in grad school together way back when. And then when you're finishing a book and you have to kind of do your last shout out, I was like, I think I'll quote this. And this is the essay that I quoted, a different aspect of it. What they were referring to, however, in these 6 propositions after Trump's second victory, the number 1 proposition, the second, is called On Lateness and Late Fascism. And the late fascism refers to a recent book from last year by Alberto Toscano called Late Fascism, and it's sort of playing with the idea of late capitalism, late fascism. But also this idea, I won't go into some of the specifics of the Trump stuff, but that if you had fascism in the 30s and then, what we're dealing with now is, in a sense, a kind of parallel to what we were talking about earlier in terms of utopian forms, revolutionary forms in the avant-garde. We don't really call our artists avant-garde anymore, but we're still sort of using some of the terms that were developed in that period and also some of the physical forms. And so I was really interested in this kind of neologism, laterness, instead of lateness. And that's their coinage. And the other thing I'll point out to you is that on the press release, there's a little dialogue where they're talking about it. And one of the things that comes up is this idea, sort of like what you were talking about, sort of future looking. If we're talking about lateness, the end of their lateness, as in Pam and David's meditation, is that art is a kind of hedge against the end, deciding that the politics have already ended, and that there's always almost a kind of deferral in terms of lateness, or maybe what you guys decided, laterness.
Oh, this is for me. I think we should start.
I mean, I had read the essay, and one of the things, I try to read David Jossett's writing because it's sort of comprehensible and good. But one of the things, it was sort of optimistic about art during this time. It gave us this like place to think about art of like, look, art can also like slow us down in this time of like, the 24-hour news cycle. It's like it will slow us down. And like that could be a good thing at this time, where maybe it's not always a good thing. So I got sort of involved in the essay, and then I sent it to Roger, and he read it, and we had a little bit of dialogue back and forth, and I was like, maybe we should call a show like, did I say lateness? And you proposed laterness then, and then we're like, oh yeah, that's better. And then we sort of tried to discuss what like laterness is, and in regard to like still artwork. And I think that it goes back to the time thing, right? Like, we use this thing from the past and it's presented in the present and it's thinking about the future. And it's this sort of, cycle that lapses all those things at once. And I don't know, it sort of helped us, put parameters around what we were together.
Yeah, it was a very sort of, obviously a little more levity than the notion of late fascism, which was our first idea. It's called the show Late Fascism. It also seemed to resonate with conditions of trying to finish a show while also, for example, teaching or living or existing under a sort of compromising sort of cultural, social conditions of speed and acceleration and franticness. I thought about sort of that, we both started showing here in 2008, which is not yesterday, and we're sort of maybe a little later in careers or something. But I mean, what I thought was nice about the Josselett and Lee text was it's almost like the values of avant-garde art and modernist art, sort of like criticality, a kind of refusal of sort of directness in terms of meaning, a deferral, like return as kind of like almost modest values for art, or modest ways that art could have a political efficacy now. Sort of much less, a much kind of like smaller, lower register than the utopian pronouncements of sort of early modernism.
Peter Berger.
Right.
The end.
Yeah.
The thing is also, and I don't mean to put pressure on you, but and many of you probably know this, that Roger, in a sense, is your work is often talked about in terms of time. And so I sort of revisited some of those thoughts, but actually the new book, Pedestrian, it has in that, and it has a couple of interesting quotes. One of the essays is by Ross Simononi, and it says, Roger White is a painter of duration. He offers a doorway into the passage of time, which I thought was very nice.
It was very flattering.
Yeah. But I like your quote. I don't know if Ross is here, but I like your quote even better, where you said, and I quote this, so I didn't fudge this. You said that you went to the Hans Memling show at the Frick, and you were thinking about it while you were looking at the painting, that there's not enough time to paint a finger of one of those Flemish bankers. The entire structure of our experience is so radically different. And I thought, oh, that's really true. You know, the people, because we always talk about painting and time, you know, and writing and painting are very similar too. It takes a lot of time, a lot of drafts to make it look like, oh, that just kind of popped out of the studio or the computer. So, yeah, those kind of things that maybe as artists you have a different relationship to time than somebody who's, I don't know, an influencer making influencing content.
I don't know what the relationship is, but it certainly feels different.
Yeah, I mean, it's also the slow looking. And there were a lot of really wonderful quotes in the little dialogue that you had, but I'm going to let other people sort of decide those on their own. How are we doing for time? Should we move on to the Q&A yet? Where's our...
How long have we been talking?
4:40.
Yeah, but we started about 5 minutes late. How much you want to go? You want to do Q&A now? What's that?
Anybody have a question?
Okay. All right.
You wanna keep
Anybody?
going, or what do you want to do?
Oh gosh. I mean, I can talk. I can keep on going, but why don't we open it up and then if you know, yeah. Prem. Yes.
You want my phone?
Sorry, so thank you, but I missed the first couple minutes. So did you mention when talking about, I walked into the piece, but did you mention the art of the century?
No.
Okay, so because the thing that's always been really interesting to me about that one that you made for Peggy Goo, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In like what, 41 or something?
Yep.
Was the rearrangeability or the activity of the thing that made the displays that kind of having some relationship with fires, extended field of vision could move.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask because when I first walked into the opening of the show, my immediate impulse was to want to rearrange the sculptures. There was an interesting film that was at the Veritas Center's Matters of Intelligence last week by Anja Hortutu, the Swedish filmmaker, in which she looks at the constructions for like 5-year-old son made, putting cups on top of each other and treats them as almost like Irwin Worm 1-minute sculptures. And so I just wanted, again, the thing I want to come back to the idea of the activated viewer, which Kiesler kind of builds upon Lissitzky's ideas of that in the 20s. And now in this era of laterness fascism, how do you think about the idea of either participation, rearrangeability, or the viewer's ability to fuck things up?
Okay.
Yeah, he's got it.
I got it.
I need a question.
Yeah.
I need the question as the answer.
There's, yeah, we were saying that there's something that feels out of step with time about ascribing a kind of a revolutionary potential to moving objects around and sort of like literally breaking those the decorum of looking at art or something. But we're obviously exploring it, you know, with those sort of works. I think that the sort of the kind of manipulability or changeability on the part of the viewer with respect to the artwork that I'm interested in has to do with the meaning of it. You know, it's on the interpretive plane. It's purely just sort of like that you can't. You delay the consumption of the digestible meaning of the thing as long as you can and explore that. But certainly, I mean, the show is full of nods towards at least the potential of sort of like rearrangement. Like these are all, you know, works that are, you know, you're able to sort of like, I'm able to put them together in different ways, and often they sort of like started as one thing and went to another thing. Like, does it change if I let someone do that in a gallery or not? I'm honestly not sure, but it's certainly sort of posed as a thought about that's one option for us.
I mean, I guess the one thing that I also think about is like sculpture, this idea of you walk around, it's an old fashioned idea, you walk around and you see it and forget it, you see it, forget it. I also think about that as akin to swiping, you know, so that's like my bringing me into the current.
I just, one sentence that came up, I realized for me is that I never thought about it until now, Roger, since they're empty calendars, of course, they invite the idea that you could write
Mark.
The other
Luckily, they're framed, so I will force you.
You could.
The other thing I'll say, to your question, when I asked Rachel or somebody, I won't pin it on you, somebody at the gallery, I said, "Are we going to move these?" They were like, "Oh no." But the thing is, with so many of those historic works, when you see a Franz vest and you see the adaptives, and they're all dirty from people touching them, and then there's a big sign that says "Don't touch." You're like, I'm so confused, Or the Lydia Clark is now in MoMA. Don't touch. It's such a funny thing. Or Charlotte Poznanska, don't touch. So it enters a weird space where I don't know. My first thought wasn't that I wanted to rearrange these, but that's all.
Yeah, I guess I do rearrange them all the time. I probably, if I put these in a box, they'll come out differently. I sort of feel like if things are in the studio, they'll just get pushed around until like the truck comes. And so there's a stillness to that, and it's also kind of an active stillness. But yeah, I don't want anybody to touch them right now. I get whatever, sculpture getting broken, and whatever is, maybe that's just putting it into another state.
Any other?
I want to say just one thing. I'm looking at these, and I think this is true of every show I've seen for the last 9 years. It's that there is that tenuousness in the work that I think is what's so extraordinary about the work. Because, there is no way in hell that anyone should need or need to even think, can this be rearranged? That's part of your premise, is that it's all like the fragility of it, but it's also the strength because you're building these many environments, and you've always done that, and you've always used color as this, you throw in the color as this element of beauty. At the same time, everything is sort of, clunky and messy and all that stuff. And so I think it's that contradiction that you have in everything you do, which is where the strength of work. And I think that just because it's sculpture doesn't mean you need to be able to physically, you can look at sculpture, you don't have to physically engage with it.
It's so still.
Sorry?
It's so still.
It's very still.
Any other questions or comments? Yeah.
One of the things that I keep looking at, I can't think the name for it, the little pieces of wood. Shims we put under to hold them so that they won't fall over. It creates a kind of provisional one where you feel like, okay, just holding for now. And that a lot of what compromises what they are seem like mementos or something. And then you get into this, as we talk about time, sort of like kind of extinctions. I don't know. There's something very like you're kind of presenting them on these brown boxes. You all know what they are. It's the provisional nature of it, which is what you're saying also. It's so amazing. Because they call up so many associations.
Well, I guess when you say provisional, because that was something that Roger and I both sort of spoke about, was like, what does it mean to make things by hand at this point? And the slowness, like how that might be really important at this moment. I don't know. Roger, you want to talk about touching your paper?
Can I ask one question real quickly? Because somebody had mentioned to me about the shims or wedges, whatever, that there might be a Duchampian reference in his door. Duchamp had this door made for his studio that was like, it closed off two spaces, so it was a kind of joke, like a pun, because it was always opened and always closed. But it might not be this. It might not be that at all.
He also made that wedge piece that was sort of like in like it was more like an axe head kind of wedge.
Okay, got
And
it.
I actually did get obsessed with that piece. And these wedges, I call them, have gone through many iterations of like the Duchamp piece, like making them smaller, making them out of ceramics. Oh, look, I can use them to hook pots up. Like, so that is just like sort of the way that like I sort of take something and then, you know, put it into my own conversation.
I think it also has that continuum with the studio and the gallery. One of the things that I didn't really mention, but I know in the past that you had mentioned Brancusi and his, you know, you say a pedestal or a base, but for him it was really part of the sculpture. And, you know, of course, the French government has his studio. You can always go into it now. And I always do anytime I'm nearby. And so that part of it too, that for somebody, a sculptor like him, and you're in this amazing lineage of sculptors where the sculpture can be a photograph, it can be in the studio, it can be, you know, I don't know, that's just one of the things with some of these that they don't need to be arranged by us, but I like seeing the way that you arrange it in terms of the different components, I guess you could say.
I mean, I guess like, you know, it is another like sort of thing I feel about like, I've always kind of made the pedestal part of the work, or question of the pedestal, or the idea of the modernist, let's get the work out of off the floor. So they've always been like part of the work. And then, you know, these pieces sort of started on like pizza boxes because Miranda brought students over and there was pizza and they started pizza boxes. And I was like, hey, that's really good. I will take them just a little off the floor and it's this remnant of this conversation. So I worked my way out of the pizza boxes into these MDF pedestals, formaldehyde-free MDF. But I have always like thought the pedestal is part of the work. I don't sort of see it as so much like sitting atop. It's like, you know, starting on the ground up.
Right.
I'm just sorry, I'm just determined to add a quick follow-up comment based on Andrea's comment about provisionality. I guess I would formulate as a proposition that the difference between the activated viewer of both Lizinsky and Kiesler is that they built the idea of the activated viewer into the display. And one way in which they invited people to change the display, whether it was in Dresden with Lizinsky or of course later with Kiesler in New York. And that reaches its apogee in Judith Barry's essay, Descent in Spaces, from '86, in which she says that the apogee of the modernist activated viewer and the natural history display is the shopping mall. So consumerism and buying options can be activated. And when you mentioned, Pam, the idea of swiping, I think that that's actually the exact opposite of the work in my reading, because swiping is a false choice. It's a thing that claims to activate you, but is actually something that's meant to control you. But what does come up here, as in Andrea's comment about the provisionality motive, when you call wabi-sabi or bumpiness, or weirdness, or unfinishedness, that allows for a different kind of interaction, both on an intellectual and potentially on a fantastic physical level, which moves beyond the idea of an activated viewer that's built into the display, since we now know that that itself is fascist.
That was quite a punchline.
I think that was good.
I don't know, it's sort of funny when you were talking about swiping. It's like the difference between swiping and being in the physical space and walking around a sculpture. And that's part of, for me, Pam's, you know, installation of the work is always, you know, very important in that respect. Any other questions? Yeah.
With your collaboration, did you like, I'm sort of curious about your discussion about joinery and like both like with the paper and panels and also with the like, I guess you call it hardware, but it's sort of interesting in relation to the sculptural work at Pam, where there's sort of like there's joinery is sort of, there's like a collapse of joinery in the work, where there's just sort of like success or the sort of like kind of slick or sort of like moments where you're not sure how it all comes together. And I'm curious about that conversation or like that difference between the fan work and the collaboration.
Who wants to start talking about that?
Well, I think I want with the collaboration, like I definitely wanted the joinery to be absolutely foregrounded, and so what was on the panel had to almost support the fact that there were these very strange, sort of like odd braces that took on, kind of like the starring role. So it became about the idea of just sort of cantilevering a plane or tweaking two things in relation to one another. And that's all I know about them. So what do you got?
I mean, it's just sort of like these pieces are made by hand and those pieces are made by 3D printing. And I've done both. I mean, I thought it was important to make, work right now by hand. And I always feel like the way something is built, it sort of reflects the time we're in. So I have, as a person that makes things, have felt free to go in and out of both of those. I don't have like necessarily one way of working. And, I think that
I think the other thing too that I was sort of sparked by that you saying, the work shows the time in which you're working, is hearing that those were 3D printed. That surprised me, but it makes perfect sense. And then the other part, which I didn't want to go too into because it was going into the weeds, but it's actually interesting weeds, is the way that the paper is colored in those works. To my understanding, you have the paper and then you put the acrylic gel and then it kind of seeps.
Yeah, they were kind of,
so there's a gradation of color that comes through seepage.
Yeah,
and time again.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, and also that it's responsive to, they're sort of like, what I did was I got these kind of mats that you put under pet crates, those rubber mats, and you fill them with liquid acrylic. I said I was only going to use the process colors, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, and make all the different tones to produce the most vivid or sort of particular thing. So if I wanted that kind of brown of the floor, I tried to match that. And when you do it, what I learned is that no two are ever going to be the same. Like just little differences in sort of like the aging of the acrylic, the amount of like glue from the paper that seeps into it, whether or not my arms got tired of holding it up to like let it drip, would create these kind of like, it's like the opposite of color, just standardized. It's like absolutely individual things. And maybe that relates to, I think it's like what we're talking about with, we're foregrounding aspects of experience that are very different than our usual, like the sort of like how things are put together, the kind of bumpiness and sort of weird way that things are supposed to fit together that interrupt the kind of smooth flow.
I think also for me, that treatment with the paper, it's where you start to have the paper being almost like a kind of photographic paper, that it's like sensitive and you're sort of forgetting when you're seeing the color aid, you think it's this kind of color fast, that you've kind of hacked the paper. So that was, and this, being close to these for longer than I've spent so far, that it is a kind of, it's a very different approach than the kind of clean cutting. And I don't know, do you have any more things you want to say to the question?
I think we're good.
Okay. If you think we're good. Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right. Well, you want to call it a day?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I have one more plug besides plugging Martha's book. I just wanted to plug. I'm part of a collaborative group that's been working together for over 20 years. Laterness group, some Claris Club people here, and we have an exhibition that's also an event for giving away money at Whitehall. It's up till December 20th. All the money gets given away to local food banks, so please visit that exhibition also.
What's that?
What's it say?
Pam, keep pressing. Pam, I'm still not off.
We're gonna have a
Okay,
hot
good.
mic situation. Thank you so much. That was great.
Oh, good.
So, yeah, really.
So really fascinating. Yeah, it did. I mean, they said they were like,